Children in the Victorian era lived harder lives than of children today. They were either brought up rich but neglected by their families, or brought up poor and were only seen as a source of income. Wealthy children were often brought up by nannies or babysitters, and were only able to see and talk to their parents at specific allotted times throughout the day. They followed the same routines every day, which often included certain times for manner lessons, education, and how to do things properly. Even though they were spoiled and lived well, they had monotonous routines and did not experience familial love, as they were not around their parents for the majority of the day. On the other hand, poor children were brought up in close quarters without any access to toys or extra activities. Because of this, they were raised directly by their parents, which allowed poor families to be closer than wealthy families. However, poor children were mainly viewed as financial assets because they were able to work at a very early age, causing poor families to try and have as many children as possible in order to maximize the amount of money that they could earn.
The lifestyle of a child in the Victorian era was based on the household they were born into. If a child was born into a wealthy family, life was easier in how they were able to receive luxuries, food, and a good education. Children born into poor families, food was much harder to come by. They were sent to work in factories so they could help their families. And because they worked for such long hours, there was no time for a good education. Later in 1870, an Education Act was made stating that all children from the ages of 5 and 10 must go to school. Even so, children still worked as a servant or as a sweatshop worker.
Education reforms were put into place mainly because of the start of England's Industrial Revolution. There was an increase in factories and use of machinery for labor, which allowed some children to go to school instead of spending their days working.
Boys of wealthy families were sent to boarding school or were homeschooled by tutors while girls practiced knitting and sewing. Poorer children were sent off to work in factories but were barely able to earn a good amount. Teachers were often very strict and their roles were often fulfilled by unmarried women who needed a source of income, not determined by their qualifications. Schools focused on teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic in addition to religion. The way they learned was to copy down everything the teacher wrote and recite chants without any mistakes.
There were many types of schools in Victorian England, but the most common were ragged schools, dame schools, and public schools. Ragged schools, also called Sunday schools, were schools set up through charity and focused on teaching children how to read the Bible. They provided free education to poor children, as well as food, clothing, and housing to those that were homeless or too poor to pay, although the conditions of the schools were often unsanitary and very run down. Dame schools were early forms of elementary schools taught by women, hence the name dame. The quality of dame schools varied greatly, ranging from daycare facilities run by illiterate teachers to satisfactory basic education. These schools were largely inadequate, as children only learned spelling and very little math or grammar. Public schools were made for wealthy children once they grew old enough to attend school. The children who attended public schools, all boys, took non-classical courses, and the schools themselves had house systems, stressed school spirit, put emphasis on Christianity, and promoted sporting activities such as football and cricket as to build character.
In Victorian schools, the schoolmaster would use a cane to hit a student causing trouble. Students would often be hit on their hands rather than on the bottoms or the back of their legs. Many schoolmasters and teachers would hit the child's non-dominant hand so they would still be able to do schoolwork. And they would also hit the student's fingers rather than the palms because it was more painful.
The education reforms of the Victorian era have paved the way for modern education and school structure. Because of the need for mass education, advanced schooling was developed, and now, educated children are able to attend colleges and universities to pursue different career paths.